United program. We also do outreach with high-risk individuals. A high-risk individual is someone defined as someone who either has picked up a gun and has shot someone, who has been potentially a victim of a shooting, or someone who, because of their environment, the things that they've seen, they've engaged with, they have potential to pick up a gun to shoot someone. And so for our gun violence intervention program, we work with individuals between the ages of 15 and 35. We do understand that we kind of need to go younger, but we follow the Cure Violence model. And with that model, they've only had evidence for 15 to 35-year-olds. With our gang intervention, we kind of go a little bit younger, 14 to 21, but we're hoping to be able to expand to the 10 to 13-year-olds. Because we kind of are seeing, unfortunately, that's where the influence starts, is younger. And so we're wanting to kind of expand that program to be able to engage with the younger youth in the Durham community. So hoping that we can do that in our next fiscal year to be able to add more staff to our team, make sure they're tooled up with knowing how to engage with that younger population. But as I stated, with the gun violence, we do follow the model, which is Cure Violence, where we use individuals that are basically second chance individuals. Some of them may have been high risk participants of our program before, or are just individuals that in their previous lives that they were people that have picked up a gun and shot someone or been involved in some type of community violence before. And so now they're coming back to want to do something different and positive in their communities. We utilize mediation, which could be something as simple as if we know of some gang-related beef, as you would call it, where we know there's some things brewing. Our staff would go out and we would kind of try to mediate between the two sides. And we've had that before. We've had some where it's been Crips and Bloods, where it's just been a neighborhood against another neighborhood, or just in general where people are just not getting along. But what I've seen over the last year and a half is that sometimes everything is not about a high-risk individual as far as gun violence. We're seeing more gun violence where it's with aggravated assaults, more crime, more with domestic partners, more just, people committing crimes. Like if I'm robbing somebody and somebody ends up getting shot, that's still considered gun violence as well. So one thing I've been doing is trying to evaluate to see if our model is the best model to follow now in Durham. We've been doing this for about 7 years now. And my thing is we're seeing a shift in what gun violence looks like. So as that shift happens, we have to continue to evaluate to see what best works for our community. And so the current model, yes, we're working with high-risk individuals and we kind of can see a decline in the target areas that we work in, but we're also seeing an incline in gun violence in general. And so how do we combat that and how do we mitigate that? So that's what our whole department kind of does. If you look at My Brother's Keeper, we're kind of looking at the full picture of the whole department, which is encompassing community safety. And so we're trying to look at what wraparound services are necessary that we can get for families before the child even thinks about picking up a gun. What are some things we know? Poverty is number one into why people may rob somebody is because of poverty. So what can we do to build that kind of community wraparound services for people that we're not the ones having to do all the work because we can't do everything, but how do we make those community partnerships so that we can refer someone to this agency that does this? How can we get this family the help they need from this resource? That's a lot of what we've been doing with My Brother's Keeper in the last year since we've revamped it and brought it back to Durham, is really identifying those core community partners that can work with our youth, not just in mentoring, which is a big thing, but also in how can we build skill sets. So we do a lot of contracting with vendors around teaching them something new. Like we just did a contract with a wood shop in Durham because you can learn how to do things with wood, but that can also be recreational, but also long-term skills that you learn that you can take somewhere else to kind of build a skill set and make money from. We're doing more things that are less recreational. Like, a lot of times we think of sports for kids. We're thinking of like kids like music. We want to take them to this place, that place. But I want to think on the other side. So with music, how can we get them not just to want to be a singer or a rapper, but how can you be behind the scenes and actually be the engineer? How can you be the producer where the real money is, the real skill is? So we're also providing that as well. We contracted with the music studio, and they're going to teach them how to do the engineering part. So that's more what we're looking for, is how do we promote more skill building so that, yes, they have something to do after school than getting into trouble, but they're also learning something that they can take with them that'll be a long-term, self-sufficient skill they can take to possibly get some gainful employment. So we've done a lot of work in the last year and a half trying to kind of go to that 2.0 of what we are used to doing, because I tell people all the time, as our youth change, we have to change. And right now we're seeing a lot of youth doing a lot of adult behavior. And so how can we provide resources for them to be able to not get in that space and be able to become adults and not have to think about the juvenile justice system and all of these things, but also how we help the family as a whole, because that's where it starts as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dana.
Hi, everybody. I am Dana Bazelon. Up until June 14th, I was the policy director at the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. And I joined that office when Larry Krasner, sort of well-known progressive prosecutor, took over in January of 2018. I began my career as a public defender and a civil rights lawyer, and I thought I was going to kind of follow that path. But Krasner, both when he ran and then when he took office, really provided space for a DA's office that looked different. And I was very excited about that, got on board with that, and joined him then. And I worked on a whole sort of host of different issues, including reducing the number of people who were in on bail, reducing the number of people who were on probation or parole. Philadelphia is massively over-supervised, making sure that we were fulfilling our Brady obligations, which means turning over evidence to the defense that they were entitled to. There was also a real historical problem in Philadelphia with that. But then I got really interested in the issues of gun violence in Philadelphia, and that was particularly true as COVID took over in 2020, and we saw kind of this rise in shootings in the summer of 2020, this massive increase in gun violence. And what we saw along with that was that the police in Philadelphia began responding by making a lot more car stops and arresting a lot more people for gun possession. So in the summer of 2020 and the year following that, arrests overall went down by 32%. The number of gun possession arrests went up by 42%. And what we saw when we looked at the stats was that these were overwhelmingly young men of color, 95%, probably the worst racial disparities in any place in the system. 86% were young black men between the ages of 18 and 30. We sort of had a window into this group, and the DA, who has an open mind to these sort of things, he and I started talking about what it could look like to divert some of these individuals. We've caught these guys, we know they're traveling with guns, but in the context of that moment, this was a year where 1 million guns were sold in the state of Pennsylvania alone. There's no shortage of them, they're everywhere. And a culture that people were existing in where more and more people were carrying guns, we felt like what we saw was a group of individuals who might be at the brink of dangerous behavior, had not crossed over, should not have been carrying guns, but also it was not at all clear to us that they belonged in the criminal justice system, or that the criminal justice system was going to make their lives better or make the city safer. So with all of that in mind, I designed a program for these kind of first-time gun, I use the word offenders because it's kind of the easiest word, but these guys who've been caught with guns who really didn't have records. There were hundreds of them. And the program that we designed, kind of looking at all the evidence we could, it lasted 6 months. Every participant was assigned a social worker who they worked with one-on-one over the course of that 6 months. They set goals. They came in to court and had a supervising judge one time, but after that, we really intentionally kept them out of the court space, and they were cohorted. So they came into the program in groups of 20, and they met once a week together for 90 minutes to talk to each other. Really just like cognitive behavioral therapy, but also just like talking about what was going on in their neighborhoods, the reasons why they had sort of picked up those guns. The program was small to start with. In the beginning, we worked entirely with an outside service provider who employed the social workers. So we were really kind of separated from the social workers, which I think generally is a good way to do this work, where there's like a bit of a barrier between law enforcement on the one hand and sort of the social work aspect of this. But what we found was that there were tons of kind of low-level barriers that were preventing a lot of these young men from being successful. It was stuff like not having ID, right? It was stuff like needing their social security cards. It was, you know, getting someone to help you write a resume up so you could go and apply for whatever the job was. And our social workers were really good at that stuff. And so kind of running the statistics in the first year or so, what we found was that about 40% of these guys had a job when they came in, 2/3 had a job when they came out, right? That kind of push, just that little nudge of moving people forward into kind of a better space really had an enormous impact. And our recidivism rates after the first 2 years were at about 5%, as opposed to 20% for people who were convicted of a similar offense, like a similar group from 2 years ago. Part of this involves kind of being strategic about who you pick for the program. I would say not every gun possession case should be diverted, and I would not divert felon in possession cases. I think it is too soon to divert shooters. I just don't think we're at a place like, we're not there yet. But what I think our program showed was that this is possible, right? That particularly in the world that we live in now in the United States, where guns are so accessible, where they're so available, possessing a gun on its own does not necessarily make you a criminal. And in fact, giving you a felony conviction for that can be incredibly detrimental and really set people back. That one mistake can have these enormous consequences over somebody's whole lifetime. And so it is a small program. It is still, you know, still going in some form, although it has now, since I left, it has shifted a little bit. But I was just very interested in this idea of pushing through to the possible, right? I had a boss in my DA who was willing to think about this in a really different way with a different frame. Obviously, there is risk involved in offering a program like this, but I think that there are enormous benefits too. And so, I mean, my pitch would just be that we sort of rethink a lot of these guys, and mostly we are, again, talking about young men who are coming in on these types of charges, and think about how we can meet their needs instead of thinking about kind of stamping them with that like felon label and kind of sending them on their way. That maybe that doesn't serve anybody, right? And maybe there is a better way to do it.
Marcia.
Yeah, perfect. Here, here. Yeah, it's really it's a delight to be with you all. Exactly. So we have in Durham historically, when you were harmed by violence, everybody turns to the criminal legal system for a response. Well, in Durham, less than 10% of non-fatal shootings, gun violence incidents, have no arrest. That's pretty good odds. If I shoot you and you don't die. If I shoot you and you do die, I have a 50% chance. So that's still pretty good odds. So to think that this community has looked at the criminal legal system as an appropriate or any kind of a complete response to the problem of gun violence is insane. It's just totally inadequate. And the problem that we face in Durham is that about every week, 50 people were killed last year in Durham. And so about every week, somebody is shot and killed in Durham. And every day, if you look at Duke Hospital, Trauma One Center, more than 400 people were treated for bullet-related injury. So that's more than every day someone is getting shot and hurt. So we have this enormous population of people, community of people that have had, did not get hurt by themselves, but are required to heal by themselves, are ignored. And I think as you talk about, both of you have described that the people that are most at risk from being harmed and doing harm with the use of a gun are young African American people. So racism, and I encourage every single person who comes into this school to spend some time in Durham County courtrooms. If you want to see who is being arrested and what is our response in this community, you will see it there. And there's no better lesson. So we over the years of working with the coalition, we reached out to families of homicide. We recognized that really what seemed to be the most unethical and immoral dilemma that we faced was a profound indifference to this suffering. Profound. I just couldn't believe it. I mean, 30 years ago, I sat down with the editor of the Herald Sun with some ministers, clergy, rabbi, imam, and asked them, why are you putting gun deaths and gun injuries, especially of our young people, in the, deep in the metro section? And all you describe is kind of what's wrong with them, right? And the editor of the Herald Sun looked at me and went, I said, so if my son got shot, you would report this incidents in the deep in the paper? And that was when the paper was really thick. And he immediately, without taking a breath, said, oh no. And we all just gasped, right? We just, and then we just looked at him. I mean, we were speechless. And he was, oh, I get it. And they started thinking about reporting on gun violence from a prevention perspective. They started saying, just again, so racism, I'm sharing what we have learned through listening sessions. Racism infects this whole thing. This gun violence, as I see it, is a symptom of a terrible imbalance. For the people looking at the criminal justice world, one of the things that we did after years and years of reaching out and having vigils and having a community response to homicides, of which 82% consistently were gun deaths, is also we realized in getting to know families that it could be both ways. They could have a child in prison for a gun harming and then having another who'd been harmed. So we recognized, we looked into so who's coming home from Durham from prison who've done B1 through E felonies in gun related, and it was 100% African American men. The average age, and this is after serving time, right? Average age was 27. 93% were referred for substance abuse counseling. And 85% had no educational credential. So everything you're talking about, both of you, is just spot on, right? That there has to be an alternative. We cannot expect people. I mean, we're not even arresting people. So to look at the criminal justice system is just absurd. And so what we did is, but also we still, as you know, the criminal legal system has really basically one response, which is punishment. It's punitive. So that's an extraordinary limitation because these are human beings and these are young human beings who have everything in front of them. And so what we did, we had this opportunity with the Duke, the health system, the Duke Institute for Health Innovations, had a grant responding to racism. Do you have any ideas about racism? We're like, oh yeah, I think we have quite a few. And one of them was to reflect on our experience doing restorative justice facilitation with the DA's office. So since 2017, we were the first people in North Carolina who had an official restorative justice in limine agreement with the courts that we could do restorative facilitation and see if we could do something new. God bless the TAM and our DA's office for letting us do that. And also, but this has been decades of every person who ever ran for DA going to those. I mean, that was a lot of work to start asking DAs who are running, do you support restorative justice? What's your position? So that took more than a decade and many elections to even kind of bring that concept into fruition. So we had been spending, we've done hundreds of cases now with the everything from stealing, theft in a store to homicides. And we're trained facilitators, we're volunteers facilitators, and when listening to what y'all are doing, so much of the social workers, like that you describe what they do, those could be done with volunteers. Because this problem is a community problem. And I get calls every week, even though I'm retired, from people saying, how can I volunteer? This affects me. It affects where I send my child to school. It affects where I buy my house. It affects everything. And so we're all in this same boat. And so we started doing these facilitations with it. And this is what we ask. We get together with a person, we bring the person who's done the harm and the person who has been harmed. We facilitate separately and we ask, what happened? What were you thinking and feeling at the time of the harm, of the incident? What are you thinking and feeling now? Who was affected and how? That's a critical question because this is a community problem. Who was affected and how? Because you're gonna learn a lot, right? And then the last question is, how do we make things as right as possible for everyone? Not only for the family and the person who is in this case has done the harm, but also, of course, everyone who is surviving the harm. And we found that when you do this kind of facilitation and you're value centered, honesty, integrity, responsibility, and compassion, that changes everything. That changes everything. And facilitators are also not a part. They're not mediators. They're simply facilitators. And what we have experienced, the healing that we have witnessed ourselves. You talk about, you feel like you're gone through the war, right? And it does feel like that. But when I do restorative justice, and that's how it felt for all those decades, right? And also doing a ministry where we received our brothers and sisters home from prison. And so everybody belongs, right? And so it's healing, it's transformative. And so we thought when Duke Institute for Health Innovations and my dear friend, Dr. Henry Rice, who is chief pediatric surgeon in the pediatric department, so I called him and together we knew that this is what we needed to do. We needed to do listening sessions with survivors of violence in Durham to find out what is needed. Nobody asked. Everybody, it's like, we'll throw billions of dollars at a retributive response. But we have nothing in Durham to care for the needs of survivors of gun violence. Nada. And that's wrong. And that is, I think, one of the machine of producing gun violence. It's that imbalance, right? So we took those same questions and we asked 30 survivors. It was 1 year. Durham, the city of Durham helped. It was with the task force. We trained over 30 facilitators and about 60 facilitators to do trainings to do 30 listening sessions of 8 hours total. And I just want to share just some of the takeaways. The lessons that we learned from all of this, of asking those questions. It was confidential, with the last question being, this is the wisdom that we are here to get you. What needs to be done to make things as right as possible? So the first lesson was the inherent value of listening to gun violence survivors. People, when you have been harmed, if you've been traumatized, you lose a coherent narrative. I don't know right? If you've been harmed, right? You just like, boom, 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 boom. Like I felt fractured when I've been harmed. And to be able to speak to someone and have the opportunity and the facilitated conversation to be able to develop a true cohesive narrative is healing in and of itself, but you need to do it with someone else. You didn't get hurt by yourself, you shouldn't heal by yourself. And so we spend those hours doing that. And This is a quote from participant 15. I thought I was going to come into these sessions and just say this happened, that happened, but it has been incredibly enlightening to come here with you both, the facilitators, to feel accepted. I didn't think that there was healing that would come from this. It has not felt clinical. It has not felt sterile or cold. I feel like there are parts of myself that I've taken back because of these sessions. So there is an inherent value in turning to one another in the midst of gun violence to solve gun violence. Second lesson, poverty, race, and racism impact gun violence survivors. Quote from participant 6, if Black men get arrested for a little minor charge, Crystal, they can't get jobs, right? So that's when they go out and steal, kill, whatever, just to get money to get things they need. If they can't get a job, they're going to do anything they need to do to get the money it takes to survive. So their mind, the white man don't care. They never have cared. They are always going to keep us down and keep their foot on our neck. So if we continue doing a retributive response, this is where we're going to have so much alienation and division. I think solution is impossible. Third, focus on the children and youth. This was overwhelming. Everybody said, take care of the children. And it's what you're finding. It's 10 years old, 10-year-old children who are stealing the cars. They're going on YouTube. They're finding out how to do this. It's incredible. And then we flood our communities with guns and then just arrest those folks and not these folks. So I'm just so honored to be here with you both. So this is a quote from participant 17, participant 17. So the boy that was sitting next to him when he was shot, he was affected really bad. He used to be calm and cool, but now he is like snapped. He became one of them because it's like, I guess he felt like, get him before they get me. So he puts up his guard as if he's got to protect himself all the time. So now he's carting a gun because he might get hurt. So retribution and fear, Fourth and final is it's bigger, is sustainability. Sustainability requires new thinking among partners. So this is participant 4. It's bigger than us. It takes a lot of voices to come as one big voice to be heard. It takes a lot of voices. I don't even know where we would even begin. I guess right here, this is a beginning. This prescriptions for repair could be possibly a beginning because now we're able to voice our opinion. So I'm just going to close with that. I just think that you get the picture. We've got a massive problem, and we are required to turn to each other with respect and integrity, honesty, and responsibility, and solve this together. And it's not going to be punishment. So thank you.
Of course, thank you all. As we sort of move into the Q&A, I just want to observe, and I guess we sort of set up this way, that we sort of saw the progression of sort of ex-ante prevention. How do we, obviously these are all intersecting, but how do we prevent these incidents from happening? How do we respond in the immediate aftermath legally? And then how sort of do you repair and restore a community sort of long term? So there is sort of like a chronological progression here around the moment of a possible incident of gun violence. One thing that each of your comments raised in various ways, which I'll just ask sort of serially, and then I'll open up to the room, is sort of how you think about like measures of success for what it is that you're doing. And like, Marcia, your comments sort of raise that sometimes that's tough. Like there's not always going to be an easy way to say that a policy or a program is or isn't working. Like if the value of listening is just inherent, that's a tough thing to kind of measure. Doing it is the success. But, Dana, you mentioned recidivism rates, and like there's sometimes ways to kind of get at this. But I'll start with you, Crystal, because you mentioned this in the sort of how does community interruption respond to changing gun violence in Durham? And, for those who are not so much in this world, there has been a lot more attention and a lot more funding available for community violence interruption, thanks in part to the 2022 Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which provides a lot of money for a variety of sort of non-carceral responses to gun violence. So I just wonder, like, how do you think about whether Bull City United is like working? Like, what are your metrics for success? And then I'll ask the same for Dana and Marcia.
And that's one of the challenges that I identified when I first came on board is how do you really show impact? And so, as I stated earlier, yes, and so we work in 6 target areas, well, 6 census tracts within the city of Durham. And one of those census tracts, they have not had a shooting in almost, I want to say 2.5 years, which is huge. But a part of that is gentrification. And so it's kind of like, how do you measure, is it really the work that we're doing, or is it the community is transitioning from what it used to be to something different? And so for me, it's looking at what is the true impact? How do we show what we're doing? It's not just, we have the data on how many mediations we're doing. We have the data on how many people we have on our caseloads, but what is our success stories? We have to start putting that into a narrative and actually being able to speak to people to say kind of what Marsha was talking about, the comments, having people show, this is where I started. I've been with this program, worked with this program. I've learned these skills. Now I'm an employed person. I don't live in that neighborhood anymore, or I'm doing this, just kind of showing what that progression looks like. You can't have the same people on your caseload forever. Because if that's the case, then are we really truly doing the work? So that's what I've been working on, is how do we really make some true performance measures that's outside of just the data that we're inputting, but how can we take that data and actually make it a story and show this is our true impact in this community? So it is kind of challenging, but it's things that I've been working with other programs that have some other performance measures to kind of build for our department as well, because that's how you get your investment. That's how you get people to know this is something that's working. I'm going to keep pouring my money into it because our community is seeing a result. So I think that's what we have to do, is we really have to identify what are we truly doing, how are we impacting these families, and how can we show the end result on the other side.
It's really interesting. But before I go to Dana, I'll just say, like, the way that you're describing it there makes a lot of sense to me, that, like, pointing to the success stories of a person who was in the program and is now doing something else, it gets around one of the hardest things I find in evaluating gun policy, which is that in some respects, like, the goal is to have something not happen, like to have the shootings not happen. It's really tough for people to imagine a world in which, like, okay, that thing didn't happen, like, it's therefore not seeable. And, like, as Marsha said, if you're living in a city that has, around 50 gun deaths a year, around 400 shootings, it's even 10 that don't happen, that's a lot of lives changed, but it's kind of tough to know kind of how they're,
You can't measure a negative.
Yeah.
It's such a good question, Joseph, in part because I think, as I was running this program, investing in it and trying to get others to invest in it, I raised about $700,000 of grant money over 2 years. Everybody wanted to know recidivism rates, right? And I was tracking them, and I cited them to you all because that's everybody's first question. But in reality, I think it's such a shallow way to look at the process. And so we were very strategic in collecting data about how many people had gotten their driver's licenses, how many people had gotten their social security cards, how many people had gone back to school for something, how many people were employed, really trying to look kind of the next layer beyond the numbers, because recidivism is one really important aspect. It is often what the public cares most about, quite honestly, but it is certainly not everything, and particularly in a moment kind of around the coronavirus and the pandemic where violence shot up in Philadelphia. We as an office, the DA's office, didn't feel we should be blamed for that. And now that violence has come way down, we don't really feel like we can take credit for that either, right? There are all kinds of factors going on that has nothing to do with law enforcement that drive what is happening in a community and how many people are being shot. So, I would just encourage anybody who's looking to study this stuff or think about it to go deeper when they think about results, right? Like, there are other metrics other than recidivism, and they can be really powerful, and it can be a way to kind of get people in and get people thinking about the people in your program as real human beings, to talk about jobs and education. If you just focus solely on recidivism, I think you lose some of that human element.
It's a nice setup for you, Marsha, the sort of toggling between these very broad questions and the very visceral human to human.
Well, I really encourage everybody to go to the Durham City website and look for the HEART program. Okay, it's an alternative, right? Instead of not every incidence of harm or distress requires a police response. And I would like to say the one thing that I have noticed for the last 30 years is the impact of a terrible or an inadequate death notification. Nobody's looking at that. So first of all the data you're talking about is within the criminal legal system, right? So Project Build is with the juvenile justice system. So we need to turn, what I'm here to say is that we need to turn our attention to the survivors, because I've never met a single person who has come, that I've known, who's come home from prison for killing someone with a gun, who hasn't been harmed, deeply and thoroughly harmed at some point in and it was his life. So if we concentrate on those who have been harmed, first of all, we're getting everybody, right? We're not relying on a system, an institution based on punishment, right? So it just opens up the whole thing. But the reason I encourage you to go to the HEART, which stands for Holistic Empathic Assistance Response Teams. Wow. So it's non-law enforcement response to harm and to incidents of harm. They have figured out how to collect data. And they did this in the formation of that department. It's a community safety department within the city of Durham. There also, what we came out of this with the task force, the recommendation that after all these listening sessions, and we also had about 20 more with families of homicide. I mean, we just talked to everybody we could get our hands on, was we need an Office of Survivor Care in Durham. So what we're doing as far as capturing, we're going to build in how do we evaluate ourselves? Because what you do is what you measure. And we can't measure quantitatively. You're right? It's like, because you talk about census tract. Well, if you don't take Durham as a whole, what does it matter, kind of, right? I mean, so we moved here, right? So, and it has to be, I think, qualitative and quantitative. So that's a whole emerging, science. And that's really, really exciting. You just can't do both. And the way that you get qualitative data, and this is what we found, and there's a wonderful article in Acute Surgery, Trauma Surgery and Acute Care journal that talks about the prescriptions for care. Beautiful, beautiful detail. And what, just the importance of being able to have listening sessions with as many people as we possibly can, so that it's not just clients, they're participants, they're neighbors. And so that's, I think, as far as we have to come up with something new, right? If we're going to create a new system, a new way of addressing something that we have been so terrible at, we need to be able to have a vision of how we want to be able, what do we measure? Because that measurement will determine our outcome. And currently our measurements are poor.
Ask one follow-up question to that, because it's a really, and this is going back to the book which I mentioned that Marcia wrote with Sam Wells, called Living Without Enemies, and you've described this over the years through your work with the coalition and others, what it means to be present, or what it means to be with. I mean, I think and this may be where sort of lawyers tend to think in terms of responses that either deter or are retributive, or serve some kind of this instrumental, maybe more measurable sort of function. But when thinking about survivors, a theme that comes out to me, at least from sort of your work over the decades, is this more just being present, just being with. Can you say about how you got there, how you came to that?
Well, I think the first we got there by recognizing that belonging, that there is this profound sense of belonging, belonging to a community. That this violence is not just in these census tracts; it affects us all, and so to be with you, and one of the things that guides my life is that sense of belonging, but also that really love needs no gain. That we're not engaging with people for gain. We're engaging with people for understanding, and then for respect, and then for collaboration and community. And out of that goodness, out of that open-heartedness, out of that, because that, in fact, provides imagination, creativity, right? And innovation. that will bring forth what we need. And so being present, so we just, it was a group of, it was in 1992, a group of people of faith, ministers. I was not one, never have been, never will be. But I was invited to the table because I really cared about this very, very much. And I grew up in Durham. And we just sat around going, what are we called to do? What is an appropriate response? And the legislature at that time, or during that time, overrode every gun law. So any municipality that had a gun law, it was null and void. Anything that touched any aspect, you know this, right? Preemption
laws, yeah.
Preempted everything.
Lawyers know these.
Right, but without resupply. Usually you preempt like a speed limit because you're replacing it with another. In this case, just boom, nothing. And so we had so all this, we were immediately, our first actions were in the legislature. We were, moving for laws, right? And then we realized this fabulous woman came this one time and said, why don't you do vigils, community vigils for those who have been taken by violence? And there was no discussion. These are ministers and stuff. These are like people who think and talk. There was no discussion. Everybody just looked at each other and said, yeah, let's do that. And so that's what we did. And so for many, many, many years, I had the honor of calling families and saying that these are public deaths. These are our people. These are mine. This is my brother. This is my sister who has been taken from us. And so we would go to the place where the violence had happened, whether it was 5 of us standing in the rain with umbrellas or 55. Singing our hearts out and just being spontaneous, just being with one another. And what we found is that kind of belonging and that kind of respect and that kind of presence, mother after mother has told me, I finally let him go today. I don't know what happened, but I finally let him go. And there's just so much possibility that comes out of relationship. And so that then gave birth to the Reconciliation Reentry Ministry, where we formed teams all over. There's about 22 of them right now in Durham. It's a 1-year covenantal relationship. When we're coming home from prison is a moment, right? It's an opportunity. And so we have, we call them faith teams because we really do have faith that all things are possible. And we walk with that person, just be with. Again, we're not telling anybody, like so many programs are kind of designed to tell you what to do. What I have found is that by being with, you're not doing for, you're just being with. You're recognizing that the wisdom and knowledge and imagination doesn't lie with the institutions and the power. It lies within us. And that's going to bring us to peace, a lasting peace, I think.
I have so many more questions for Crystal and Dana, but I realize I should probably open to the room. Raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. Start with Professor Jeff Swanson.
First of all, thank you all very much for your work and what you shared with us today. It's very inspiring. So it seems to me that whatever an entity, a group of people decide to do about gun violence, how to solve the problem, there's some kind of implicit theory of the problem, of what causes it, whether you've articulated it or not. And so when I wanted to ask you about that a little bit, because when I think about it, you can approach it as a public health problem, you can approach it as a crime problem, a justice problem, a cultural problem, or all kinds of things. I was interviewed, and the interviewer quoted an Alabama legislator who said, it's a moral deficit, that's the problem. And he asked me if that made sense. I said, well, it doesn't make sense that Alabama would have a moral deficit 10 times greater than New York because they have 10 times gun deaths per capita as New York. So we have to find. But if I think about it, there are these two components. There is all these complex causes of injurious, aggressive behavior. So, and you talked about poverty and racism. You talked about kids growing up, in terrible conditions, being exposed to trauma. And so, if you think those are the causes, the macro level causes, and violent behavior as an adult is a traumatic echo of what happened to people when they're young, then you want to, address those problems. The other way to think about it is, we're not going to live in a world where we won't have people inclined to harm others, but we don't have to have so many people dying. We don't have to have so many people with easy access to this technology that's designed to kill people very easily with minimal, effort. So what you're doing, it seems to me, is really focusing more on the behavior. Let's change the conditions. Let's change how people are behaving. But very little about what to do. That we live in a culture now where half the people think the solution to gun violence is we need more guns in the hands of more people in more places to protect ourselves. And so, how do you think about the access to firearms issue? When we're going from 2 million new gun owners a year to 5 million new gun owners a year, and people are acquiring guns for different reasons to protect themselves. And so I'm just asking, I don't know if any of you to respond to the firearm access aspect of this.
I'm happy to try and start. This is an issue that I have thought profoundly about, and I agree with you. I mean, the overwhelming response that we got from our participants in my program as to why they were carrying a gun was that they felt unsafe, right? And that was not a problem that we could fix. It also was not an irrational response to what was going on in their community. The more people around you who have a gun, the more likely you are to think you should have a gun, right? If everybody's got one, everybody's packing and you're not packing, well, you're at a real disadvantage. I wish I had a better solution to that. I mean, this country does not seem to be going in the direction of more gun control and gun protections. If anything, it's, very much going in the other direction. I was just looking nationwide at state laws recently and was sort of horrified by the number of states who have decreased the regulations. It's true in Pennsylvania. I know it's true in North Carolina as well. I do think that to some degree, these problems will be insoluble until we have fewer guns. We can make it better. We can give people other options. We can make sure that, people understand the danger of guns. And the safer the streets get, I think the less people actually feel like they need one to leave their home. But having some conversations with our participants, I mean, they were voicing that what they were saying wasn't at all irrational as to why they had picked up a gun. And it's a cultural change that's happening in our country. More and more people want them, more and more people own them. And it's a huge, huge problem. I think part of it, again, we need to have like the alternative cultural shift. We need to figure out how to sort of reconquer some of that territory and get people to understand that actually guns are not making you safer, and certainly not if you don't learn how to use them properly and lock them up and all those things. But bigger brains than mine are going to have to tackle kind of the bigger socioeconomic and cultural shifts that have occurred to kind of get us to this point. I see it. It's an overwhelming problem, I would say.
And in part of the work that we do talk about safe storage. We have a program within our public health department that we collaborate with around safe storage. We talk about it with our youth. I even talk about when we have community events, we give out gun locks. We talk about not keeping them in your cars, because I do see it from both perspectives. My background is in social work, so inherently that's where I go to, is behavioral. But when I look at it from stepping outside of that world, we have to look at the policies. And that's what My Brother's Keeper does. We're looking at more policy-driven things that trickle down into the behavioral parts. And so part of our work is to look at what are some policies that we can come together as a committee to be put forth with our state legislators. Because with the county, every year we have some priorities that they ask us for from each department that we want to take to the state legislators. And part of that will be some conversation around gun safety, gun laws, and gun access, because that's the biggest thing. Kids are breaking into cars just to get guns. Kids are also finding ways to make them. So they're ordering parts from different places and they're actually making their own guns. And so, letting parents know, being mindful of what type of access they're giving their kids to money, as far as social media, their online presence, because they're learning how to make their own guns as well. So we kind of incorporate all of this education and awareness into the work we're doing, because it's not just behavioral, it's not just environment, it's also the access as well.
On that, I just want to plug, in a couple weeks, we have an event coming up that will include, among other things, discussion of ghost guns, which is a big issue going forward. More questions? Oh, sorry, I couldn't say my blind spot here.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the panel for the fine compliment of the presentation. And similar to the professor, I was just thinking, you all talked about not only how to address, the individuals, but also systemic issues, because we know that those inequities live in our policies and our practices and procedures. And I'm just reminded, and how we get proximate to what the problem is, because often we're solving other things, but then the problem persists. I have a magic wand question, so that's always hard, right? But I'm reminded of just the analogy, and you all reminded me of it as you all presented, of the fish in the lake. And many of you may know that when one or two fish go belly up in a lake, it makes sense to kind of examine the water. But when half or 3/4 of our fish are going belly up in the lake, it's time to, sometimes people say fix the water, but I'm thinking at least examine it, right? And often we're still kind of in the fish fixing business, even when we see that there's something happening in our ecosystem. So thank you for your presentation. But now the magic wand question for any of you or all of you. If there was perhaps a non-traditional institutional partner as you do your work, and I say non-traditional because you could point to some that, that you would just, magically put at the center of your table when you're having these conversations, or a policy or practice or procedure that you can point to that could affect the most change affecting the lake, and of course that would help the individuals, what would that be? Anything about it. That's in my mind.
This is a great one for us to actually take quick responses and end on, because a lot of the conversation has been about religious groups, universities, community groups,
Right.
Law enforcement. We've already covered a lot of the waterfront, so curious for quick responses on this from anybody who cares to.
I just want to say the number one cause of death for our children in Durham is gun violence. So we got a lot of fish, belly up, right? So we're past time. So I think if I had a magic wand, what I would do is I would direct our dollars, our attention, our brilliance, our collaboration, our partnerships to look at how we heal. Because it is that we become a community of accountability. Because if that means there's more than 90% of the people who have been harmed, there's no response, y'all. There's no legal response whatsoever. You're sitting there alone, feeling judged, harmed, traumatized, scared, that we seek out and serve and build relationships with every single person who has ever been harmed by gun violence. And let those relationships let us understand accountability through a restorative justice lens.
I mean, it sounds oversimple and not possible, quite honestly, in the world that we live in now. I would take the guns, right? Right. I mean, exactly. And I don't, and it was funny, I was listening as somebody was saying.
Won't let you do that.
Not just me.
There's this Constitution thing, but Dana and I have talked about it a lot.
We have talked about it a lot. Even, I mean, the Harris campaign was just, she had once said she was interested in mandatory buyback. I think it's too late, is the practical bottom line. I think once somebody possesses a gun, they want it and they want to keep it, it's a natural human thing. But they are incredibly dangerous. People don't know how to use them, and they're just ubiquitous. They are ubiquitous. So if I had that wand that you're talking about, I would start over, and the Second Amendment would read really differently.
Crystal, take us all.
I think for me, and this is something just came to me, and I think for me, I feel like a lot of people don't really think gun violence is an issue because it doesn't affect them. And so I think once you actually can feel and see the effect of the gun violence, then the light bulb comes on, and then you might have a shift in your paradigm of thinking. So I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with reentry simulations that they have around here. I feel like we might need to have one around gun violence and actually have people who are the lawmakers be in a space and actually participate in a simulation around gun violence. And they can actually see how it may not be at your doorstep right now, but how can you see the impacts and how it does impact you, regardless if it's somebody in your family, a friend of yours, but actually be a part of that simulation to change their paradigm of what gun violence looks like and how they are actually impacted, whether it's personal or not. So
I'd like to end with the paradigm shifting and the light bulbs going off, because I think a lot of what we've talked about here, I think for lawyers and law students will be exactly that. So please join me thanking our fantastic panel.
I know,
Henry's
I
so
know,
bad.
I know.
I had his-
Do you want the